Okay, today we're going to talk about comparing and ordering numbers. This first step, step one, is not going to be applicable. Will I show you here on the computer? But when you look at your homework, this is going to be an important step to convert all the numbers to standard form. Sometimes they might give you numbers in any of the ways that we've discussed. They might show it to you as a mixed number. They might show it to you in written form. It's important that you, before you do anything else, you're going to convert it to standard form. That way I'm comparing two like things. Alright? Step two, you're going to want to line up your numbers you're going to line up by the decimal, or if there's no decimal, you can line up the ones place. So let me just get rid of my okay, so if I move this over, you can see that I'm lining up the decimal. And if I were to make a place value chart, you can see my tenths place is lined up, my hundredths place is lined up, my ones, my tens, my hundreds, my thousands. But watch this, because this is a common mistake that people make. If I line it up like that, are my decimals lined up? They're not lined up. So in that case, this isn't lined up properly, so I can't compare them. So think about just lining up this decimal. The decimals should be directly underneath one another. And I'm going to just go back quickly and grab my pen. So now that I have them lined up, I'm going to start with the largest place value. Okay? So in this case, the largest place value I have is 3. So because it's the same, I'm going to keep moving right until I find one that's larger. So the thousands place is the same. I can't determine which one's greater than yet. The 5 in the hundreds place is the same. I can't determine which one's greater. When I get to the tens place, though, you can see there's a 6 or a 7. The 7 is greater. This one has a greater 10. It has one more 10 than the number above it. So this would be my greater number. If I want to compare it, I want to make sure. I usually think of this guy as a Pac-Man, and the mouth should open up toward the bigger number. Okay, you can also think of it as an arrow, and the arrow should point at and laugh at the smaller number. Either way to help you remember, but it should open up toward the bigger number. Now if you look, you can see any of these other numbers could be bigger or smaller, but because this number right here, this 7, means one more 10, I don't really need to look at the rest of it. Another thing to remember is if you're dealing with decimals, the number of digits doesn't matter. Let me show you an example of that. So I might have 9 tenths, and I might have 78 hundredths. Okay? Many kids, their inclination will be to look at that and say, oh, 78 hundredths, that has more digits. It's bigger. But if you look at this, this is a blank space. And we know that a blank space is equivalent to a 0. So now if I look at it, it's a little clearer. I can see that this is 90 hundredths, which is the same thing as 9 tenths, and this is 78 hundredths. So sometimes decimals gets a little confusing in that way, and we want to remember that the number of digits doesn't always tell me which number is larger. Okay, so if I want to place from least to greatest, we'll do a couple of these. So again, I would line them up on a separate sheet of paper. So I have 8 and 9 tenths. I have 8 and 59 hundredths. I have 8 and 705 thousandths. And 8 and 5 hundredths. Now, if I look at the ones place, they're all the same. I can't use that place to determine which one is going to be larger. Or I want to go the smallest number first. So I'm going to look at the tenths place. And I can see if I'm looking for the least number, this one has the smallest number in the tenths place. See how it has a 0? So I would list that one first. And then I would have I usually use a semicolon because I want to make sure that it doesn't look like a comma that would be inserted inside a number. Sometimes the other thing I'll do is make a slash like that. But I just want to get in the habit of not just using a comma because commas already exist in numbers. So get rid of that. If I look again, I'm still in the tenths place. And my next smallest one is going to be this number right here. So I would list that next. And again, I'm going to use a semicolon or a slash, cross it off. The next smallest number is the 7 because that's smaller than the 9. And then last but not least, the largest number is this 8 and 9/10. And again, I can see that order or the number of digits doesn't matter. This had the smallest number of digits, but we know that blank spaces mean zeros. So if I add those in, it makes it a little clearer. I think at this point I'm going to show you a couple from your homework. So if you can look at the practice sheet, we'll look at a couple that will look very similar. And again, they're not exactly the same as your homework, but they'll look very similar to the ones on your homework. So if you look here, let's look at B first. You can see that it's going to be important to convert them into the same form. They should all be in standard form. So here, that number is in standard form. It's 83/100. I'm going to convert this so that I can better see what 83/100 looks like. And if I look at that, I can see that that is most definitely equivalent. This is equivalent to that, and you can use an equal sign. If I look at this one right here, let's look at F, okay? Again, I have this already in standard form. I can leave that alone. That's 8 3/10. This is 83/10. Well, I know I want to end up in the tenths place, so I have 8 3/10, okay? Some people will try and write it like this, but in that case, I end up in the hundreds spot. So 83/10, when I'm saying tenths, I have to end up in the tenths place. And I can see now that those are equivalent. If I look here at G, this is 5 and 8/10. Here, I have 58/100. So because I said hundredths, I want to end up in the hundredth spot. So this one, I can see looking at them right off the bat that they are different. So what I'm going to do is line them up by the decimal. So I would go over to the side, 5 and 8/10, and then 58/100. And I can see that there's a blank space here, which is the same thing as the 0. And I can see that the other digit has a 5. So the one with the 5 in the 1 spot is most definitely larger. You did some of those on there. And I don't think you have any word problems. We'll do another one of these. When they say increasing, they're going to mean getting bigger. When something increases, it means it's getting bigger. So you want to start off small and go big. When they say decreasing, they mean that it's getting smaller. So that would be big to small. So again, let's look at one of these. I would probably use a scrap sheet of paper for this because there's going to be a lot of writing. If you have room in the margins and you write small, that's fine. But it might be helpful to write with a scrap sheet of paper. And I'm just taking these digits here and I'm lining them up by the decimal. So if I look at the ones place, I can see that's not going to help me. They're all the same. I want to start off with the biggest one because I'm going biggest to smallest. If I look at the tens place, I can see that this one is the smallest. So I'm going to mark that one smallest. However, I have all these three that have the same number in the tenths place. So I have to go over to the hundredths place. This one has a 0, this one has an 8, and this has a blank space, which is the same thing as a 0. So in this case, this is my largest number. I'm going to circle it and write it over there, and then cross it off. I now need to look between these two to find out which one is my second largest. So we have the 7s in the ones place, the 6s in the tenths place, the 0s in the hundredths place, and here I have an 8 and then a blank space. Because a blank space is the same thing as a 0, I know this would be my next largest number. Okay, and we already said that's the smallest. This one I want to be careful. I added 2 zeros to help me, but I want to be careful that I write it the way it's listed. So I'm going to go back to writing it without the if they're not trapped zeros, remember I don't have to write them. And then we already said that one was smallest. And so I would list them in decreasing order. They're getting smaller, so I go big to small.